There are crimes that announce themselves. Loud ones, bloody ones. Crimes that leave evidence screaming from every corner of a room. And then there are the quiet ones. The ones where nothing looks wrong on the surface. Where the neighbors say, "I had no idea." Where the police show up, look around, and leave, not because they found nothing, but because they couldn't name what they felt. This is the case of Mira Calloway, a woman who, by every measurable standard, was alive and well. She paid her bills on time. She smiled at the postman. She brought casseroles to sick neighbors. And on the morning of March 14th, a single officer named Dale Rourke drove past her house on routine patrol, slowed down, stared at the front door for almost 40 seconds, and then kept driving. He wrote nothing in his log. He called nothing in. He just drove. When asked about it later, he said something that would haunt the entire investigation. He said, "I don't know what I saw. I just knew I wasn't supposed to see it." Mira Calloway was 38 years old, a high school art teacher who had lived in the small town of Ashfield Creek for 11 years. People described her the same way, over and over, in the interviews that came later. Warm, quiet, private, but in a kind way. She had no criminal record, no known enemies. She had a cat named Sable, a vegetable garden along the east side of her house, and a habit of leaving her porch light on all night, because she said she hated coming home to darkness. She had no children. She had been divorced for 3 years, and as it turned out, she had been living a life that no one in Ashfield Creek had even glimpsed. It began, like most things in Ashfield Creek, with a neighbor, Pauline Greer, age 62, retired school librarian, lived directly across the street from Mira. On March 12th, 2 days before Officer Rourke's strange pause outside the Calloway house, Pauline called a non-emergency line and reported something that, at the time, the dispatcher categorized as noise complaint unresolved. Pauline had heard something the night before. Not a scream, not a crash. She described it as a sound like an argument, but the kind where only one person is speaking, like someone talking very calmly to someone who is saying nothing back. She said it lasted from approximately midnight to nearly 2 in the morning. She said when she looked out her window, Myra's lights were all off, every single one, and she had never, in 11 years, seen Myra's porch light off. The dispatch log from that night shows a call was received at 11:47 p.m. It was flagged low priority. No unit was sent. The note in the system read, "Caller reports possible verbal disturbance, residential. No threat indicated. No follow-up required." 12 words. That's all that stood between what happened in that house and a moment where someone might have intervened. 12 words and a dispatcher who had already handled 43 calls that night. Ashfield Creek was the kind of town that forgot to grow. Population, 4,811. The sign at the edge of town hadn't been updated since 2009, and nobody seemed bothered. There was one diner, one gas station, one church that held 3 different congregations on rotating Sundays, and a police department of 9 officers, 7 of whom had grown up in Ashfield Creek themselves. It was, by every measure, the kind of town where people looked out for each other. And it was exactly that kind of town, where familiarity breeds blindness, where the worst things can happen the quietest. On March 14th, at 9:22 a.m., Mira Calloway did not show up to teach her first period class. This was unusual. She had missed exactly 1 day in 3 years, and that was for a kidney stone. Her department head, a woman named Sandra Holt, called Myra's cell phone 4 times between 9:30 and 10:15. No answer. By 10:30, Sandra had called the school office. By 11 a.m., the school office had called a non-emergency line. By 11:40, Officer Dale Rourke, the same man who had slowed his cruiser to a crawl outside her house 2 days before, was walking up Mira Calloway's front path. He knocked 3 times, then waited, knocked again. Nothing. The porch light was still off, the same as 2 nights ago. He noted the curtains in the front bay window were closed, which he described later as unusual, saying Myra's curtains were always open during the day. She liked the light. He tried the door. Locked. He walked around the side of the house. The vegetable garden, her pride, had a low gate unlatched, swinging slightly in the wind. He pushed through, and then he stopped. In his incident report, Rourke wrote the following. At approximately 11:52 a.m., while conducting a perimeter check of the residence, I observed what appeared to be a single set of footprints in the soft soil of the garden bed, leading from the rear of the property toward the east side gate. The prints appeared to be from bare feet. The morning temperature was 34 degrees Fahrenheit. Bare feet, in 34-degree weather, in a garden bed, walking away from the house. He called for backup. The responding sergeant, a man named Gerald Marsh, arrived 11 minutes later. Together, they made entry through the rear door, which was unlocked. What they found inside was not chaos. That's what makes this case different from the ones you've already heard. There was no overturned furniture, no broken glass. The kitchen was spotless, dishes drying neatly in the rack, a single mug on the counter with a tea bag still in it, the string hanging over the rim. The living room was tidy. The cat, Sable, was sitting in the hallway, entirely calm, watching them come in. In the bathroom, a towel folded on a rack, a toothbrush wet, everything exactly as it should be, except for one thing that Sergeant Marsh said he would never be able to unsee. The bedroom door was closed. Not locked, just closed. Marsh pushed it open slowly. The bed was made, perfectly made, hospital corners, pillows centered. On the nightstand, an alarm clock reading 3:17, not the current time. The clock had stopped. A glass of water, full untouched. A small frame photograph, face down, and written on the mirror above the dresser, in what appeared to be Myra's own lipstick, were 4 words. 4 words that became the headline, the mystery and the haunting of this case. The words were, I already told someone. Within the hour, the house was a crime scene. But here's the problem, and the question that would paralyze this investigation for weeks. There was no victim. Mira Calloway was not in the house. She was not in the yard. She was not in her car, which was parked in the driveway, keys inside, engine cold. There was no blood, no signs of a struggle, no evidence of forced entry or exit, no evidence of second person having been inside, no fingerprints that weren't Myra's own, no hair, no fibers, no footprints inside the house other than hers. Just 4 words on a mirror, and a woman who had simply ceased to exist. The search for Mira Calloway began immediately. Volunteers from town, nearly 300 people, a staggering number for a place the size of Ashfield Creek, assembled at the elementary school parking lot. They were given grid assignments. They searched the woods that bordered the east side of town. They searched the old rail trail. They dragged the retention pond behind the municipal building. They found a lost dog, a stolen bicycle, and 17 years of accumulated trash along the creek bed. They did not find Mira. Detectives moved fast to Thomas Calloway, Myra's ex-husband. They always do in cases like this. Statistically, they're usually right too. Thomas was 41, a contractor, living 47 miles away in a town called Pratt's Mill. He was cooperative. He seemed genuinely distressed. He answered every question. His alibi, a poker game at a friend's house with 6 witnesses, was airtight from 7 p.m. March 13th through 2 a.m. March 14th. He had not contacted Mira in 6 months. He said the divorce had been mutual and civil. He said, and this is important, he said, Mira wasn't the kind of person who had enemies, but she also wasn't the kind of person who let people know when something was wrong. She carried everything herself. Sandra Holt, Mira's apartment head, was interviewed on day 2. She described Mira as the most self-contained person I've ever known, in a way that always worried me, looking back. She said something had been off with Mira for the last 6 weeks. She'd been quieter than usual. She'd stopped eating lunch in the faculty room. She'd canceled 2 of her after-school art clubs without explanation. When Sandra asked if everything was okay, Mira had smiled and said, "Better than okay. I'm sorting something out." Sandra had taken that as reassurance. Now she replayed it as a warning she'd missed. On day 3, forensics completed their full sweep of the house. They had one significant find. On a floorboard beneath Mira's bed, a loose board she had clearly known about and used deliberately. They found a journal, dark green hardcover, elastic band. Her initials pressed into the front. Inside, 212 pages of Mira's handwriting, spanning the last 8 months. The first detective to read it, a woman named Adrienne Cole, described the experience this way. "I've read a lot of case files in my life. I've never read anything that felt so much like watching someone walk toward a cliff in slow motion while waving at everyone they passed." The journal entries will be read selectively because the full contents remain, as of this recording, under investigative seal. But 4 entries were shared with the public during the investigation by a source close to the case. The first, dated 7 months before her disappearance, read, "He found me. I knew he would eventually. I've spent a long time pretending this day wasn't coming. Now that it's here, I don't feel afraid the way I thought I would. I feel something closer to clarity, like a headache finally breaking. I've decided I won't run. Running is how he wins. I'm going to do this differently. I'm going to document everything. I'm going to tell someone. I just need to figure out who." Over the next 40 pages, Mira referred to a person she called Only V. She never used his full name. Only V. She described him as someone she had known in another life. Before Ashfield Creek, before Thomas, before she'd remade herself into the woman her neighbors knew, she wrote, "V doesn't come when he's angry. That's what people never understand about men like him. He comes when he's calm. That's when you should run." Detective Adrienne Cole had been with the county's investigative unit for 14 years. She worked domestic violence cases, cold cases, disappearances. She knew the patterns. But this case, she said later, kept refusing to fit any of them. "Every case has a shape," she told a colleague. "This one kept changing shape every time I thought I had it." Cole was 39, methodical, quietly relentless. She had the kind of face that put witnesses at ease, warm eyes, an unhurried manner, but the kind of mind that never stopped. She would be the one who, 3 weeks into the investigation, noticed something in the journal that everyone else had overlooked, something small, something that changed everything. While Cole was deep in the journal, other investigators pulled Mira's phone records. Mira had 2 phones, a fact nobody had known. Her regular cell, registered in her name, and a prepaid phone, found taped to the inside of a kitchen cabinet drawer. behind a false panel she had constructed herself with remarkable skill. The prepaid phone had 44 calls, all to the same number, all between the hours of 9 p.m. and midnight. The number traced to a burner. The burner was unregistered. The burner was cold. But the call log showed something crucial. The last call Mira made was at 11:23 p.m. on March 13th, the same night Pauline Greer heard the one-sided argument, and it lasted 2 minutes and 41 seconds. Investigators worked the burner number for 11 days. What they eventually traced, through cell tower pings, purchased records from a gas station convenience store 40 miles east, and CCTV footage, was a man who had bought that burner phone using cash, wearing a baseball cap, face never fully visible on camera. They had a height estimate, 6 feet, 1 inch, a build, lean, athletic for his age, and one thing from the gas station footage that Cole flagged after watching it 17 times. In the background of the frame, barely visible in the parking lot, was a vehicle, a dark green pickup truck. Partial plate, VK4, VK, V, it wasn't nothing. Here is what Detective Cole found in the journal on page 174. An entry dated February 28th, 2 weeks before the disappearance. It read, I went to the police station today, not the local one, the county building on Route 9. I asked to speak to someone in the victim's advocacy unit. I sat in the waiting room for 40 minutes. A young officer came out and asked what I needed. I told him I believed I was being watched by someone dangerous, someone with a history of violence, and that I wanted to file a protective documentation report. He gave me a form. He asked if I had a restraining order. I said no. He said without physical evidence of a direct threat, the documentation would be filed, but likely wouldn't result in any immediate action. He was polite. He was sorry. He showed me out. The form I filled out was 4 pages. My hands were shaking the whole time. I drove home and sat in the driveway for an hour, and I thought I already told someone, and it changed nothing. So I'm going to try something else. Investigators found the form. It was in the county record system, digital, time-stamped, February 28th, 10:47 a.m. It had been processed. It had been assigned a reference number. It had been filed under low-risk monitor. No follow-up had been scheduled. No detective had been assigned. The name she had provided for the individual she feared was redacted in the records released publicly, but internally, investigators now had it. And when they ran that name, what came back was not nothing. What came back was a file so thick that 2 detectives in the room went quiet when they saw it. His name, which we will not use in full, was Victor Aldrin Solis, 51 years old. He had 3 prior addresses across 4 states. He had 2 prior arrests, one for aggravated stalking in a state 3,000 miles away. Charges dropped when the victim, a woman, recanted under circumstances her own family called coerced. One for breaking and entering, pleaded down a trespassing community service. He had held 8 jobs in 12 years, each lasting less than 18 months. He had no permanent address on file at the time of Mira's disappearance. He had no social media presence. He had, by all external measures, made himself invisible, and he had known Mira, investigators eventually confirmed, from 15 years ago, before she was Mira Calloway, before she changed her name. Mira Calloway had been born Mira Frances Venn. She had legally changed her name at age 26, following a 2-year relationship with Victor Solis that had ended, according to records Cole uncovered with a hospital visit, a police report that was never pursued, and Mira moving to a new city with 3 garbage bags of belongings and a restraining order that expired and was never renewed. She had rebuilt her life so thoroughly, so carefully, new name, new town, new career, new person, that even her ex-husband Thomas had not known her original name. She had carried this alone for 11 years, alone, and then 7 months before she vanished, he had found her. The journal entry from February 28th had said, "I'm going to try something else." For 3 weeks, investigators couldn't determine what that something else was. Then Pauline Greer, the neighbor, mentioned something in a follow-up interview that she hadn't thought relevant. She said, "About 3 weeks ago, so mid-February, I saw Mira on her porch at night. She had her phone out, and she was photographing her own mailbox and her front door. I thought she was being artistic. She was an art teacher, so I just figured, photographing her own mailbox, her front door, evidence documentation. Mira had been building a case, on her own, without waiting for anyone to build it for her." Investigators found on day 22 a cloud storage account, not linked to any of Mira's known email addresses, containing a folder labeled simply for after. Inside, 237 photographs, images of her mailbox, her front door, her garden gate, with objects subtly displaced between images, showing that someone had been there. A garden stake moved 3 inches. A potted plant turned 90 degrees. Footprints in the soft soil at the base of her porch that she had photographed in precise, dated sequence. A handwritten log, photographed page by page, in which she had documented 17 instances of someone entering and leaving her property without making contact. 17, all while she continued teaching. All while she smiled and brought casseroles and left her porch light on. And there was one more thing in that cloud folder. One audio file, unlabeled, recorded at 11:23 p.m. on March 13th. The exact time of that last call on the prepaid phone. 2 minutes and 41 seconds. Investigators listened to it with headphones, in a quiet room, with the volume as high as it could go. For the first 40 seconds, Mira's breathing. Then her voice controlled clear, saying, "I'm recording this now. The time is 11:23 p.m. I have just spoken to the police. For the 4th time, I have a folder of evidence that I have uploaded to a location they'll be able to find if they look. My name is Mira Frances Venn. I used to be someone who believed that institutions would protect me. I don't believe that anymore, but I believe in documentation. I believe that the truth exists even when no one is listening. And I have to believe, that someone eventually will hear this." Then the sound of her setting the phone down, and then nothing. I already told someone. Those 4 words. She had told the county's victim advocacy unit. She had told a burner phone. She had told a cloud folder. She had told a journal under floorboards. She had told the photographs, the voice memo, the evidence log. She had told everyone and no one simultaneously, because the institutions that were supposed to listen had offered her a form, and the people who loved her had never known there was something to hear. The message on the mirror wasn't a cry for help. It was a receipt. It was Mira saying, "When you find this, because eventually someone will find this, know that I did everything right. I did not disappear because I didn't try. I disappeared because try was not enough." With Victor Solis now identified, investigators moved fast. An alert went out. His last known vehicle, a dark green pickup, partial plate matching VK4, was flagged nationally. His mugshot was released to the public. The FBI was looped in. For 9 days, he was a ghost. On the 10th day, he was found. Not by police, not by a tip line, not by any of the mechanisms that were now finally, furiously turning on his behalf. He was found by a gas station attendant in a small desert town 400 miles away who recognized his face from a news alert on her phone and called 911 while pretending to run his credit card. Victor Solis was arrested without incident. He did not run. He did not struggle. He stood beside the gas pump with his arms at his sides and let the sheriff's deputies approach him as if he had been waiting. He said nothing. He asked for a lawyer before he was even in handcuffs. He had been through this before. He knew exactly how it worked. And as he was driven away in the back of a cruiser, a detective at the scene noted that he looked out the window at the passing desert with an expression of pure, unruffled calm, not the calm of innocence, something colder than that. Victor Solis refused to speak. Not one word about Mira, not one word about Ashfield Creek. His attorney filed motion after motion. Investigators could place him in the area during the relevant dates through cell tower data. They could place him at her property through soil analysis of his truck bed. They had Myra's evidence log documenting his presence 17 times. They had everything, except Mira. She had not been found. She had not made contact. No body had been recovered. And in the absence of a body, in the legal weight of that absence, the case became a structure built on everything except its center. Victor Solis was charged with stalking, criminal trespass, unlawful surveillance, and, on the strength of the soil evidence and cell data, unlawful detention. He was not charged with murder. The law requires a body or overwhelming evidence of death. They had neither. The trial lasted 9 days. He was convicted on 3 of the 5 charges. He was sentenced to 4 years and 8 months, with the possibility of parole in 32 months. In the courtroom that day, Sandra Holt wept. Pauline Greer sat with her hands in her lap and stared at the wall. Thomas Calloway stood up and had to be ushered out. Detective Adrian Cole sat very still and said nothing, because there was nothing to say that the sentence hadn't already said for her. Ashfield Creek did what small towns do in the aftermath of something that breaks them. They made something visible. A candlelight vigil was held on March 14th, the 1-year anniversary. 312 people came. Someone placed a white lamp on Myra's porch. The porch was still owned by her estate, no one having moved to sell it yet, and left it burning through the night. The vegetable garden had been tended anonymously since her disappearance. No one knew who was doing it, but every spring the tomatoes grew. In a recorded interview 18 months after the case opened, Detective Adrian Cole was asked what she wanted people to take away from this case. She thought about it for a long time. Then she said, "I want people to understand that Mira did everything right. She documented. She reached out. She created a trail so clear that we found him. She built the case that convicted him. She saved herself in every way the system asked her to, and then the system failed her anyway." So when people ask me what the lesson is, it's not about what Mira should have done differently. It's about what we should have done differently. What we're still not doing differently. That's the conversation. That's the case that never closed. Where's Mira Calloway? As of the making of this episode, she has not been found. Victor Solis has never said a word. His parole hearing is scheduled. The house on the cul-de-sac at the end of Ashfield Creek's quiet street still has its porch light on, because someone goes there and replaces the bulb when it burns out, and no one has ever been seen doing it. The journal is in evidence storage. The cloud folder is sealed. The voice memo, 2 minutes and 41 seconds, sits a file that may one day go to trial again, or may sit there until the drives degrade and the servers go dark. Myra's voice recorded at 11:23 p.m. on the last night anyone knew she was alive, says, "I believe that the truth exists even when no one is listening." She said it once, into a phone, in a dark room, alone, and she was right. We're listening now. We're just too late. You just opened case file 007, the case of Mira Calloway, a woman who told everyone and was heard by no one until it was too late. Some vaults don't close, some lights don't go out, and some truths wait in cloud folders and floorboard journals and voice memos, patient as stone, waiting for the right person to finally, truly listen. This is the Crime Vault, where the case doesn't end when the credits do, where the silence says more than the answers ever could, and where every light left burning is a question we haven't finished asking. Before you go, I need you to do something for me. If this story stayed with you, if Myra's voice stayed with you, hit that subscribe button right now, because every week, another vault opens, another case file unseals, and you should be there when it does. Drop a comment below telling me, what do you think happened to Mira Calloway? Do you think she escaped? Do you think she planned her own disappearance to get away from V? Or do you think the answer is something darker? Tell me what you think, because in the Crime Vault, the audience is part of the investigation, and I read every single comment. Also, tell me what kind of case you want next. A cold case that was solved 30 years too late? A disappearance that the police called an accident until someone didn't? A killer hiding in plain sight for a decade in a town that trusted everyone? Drop your vote below. The Vault responds to its members. And if this is your first time here, welcome. You chose a dark door to open. I hope you stay a while.